Hi everyone, Vanman here. Of all the evolutionary lines in Pokemon, most of them represent a natural progression from a slightly weaker version of the Pokemon to a form that's slightly stronger. In fact, that entire ethos is what defines Pokemon, and Pokemon wouldn't be what it is today without it. But, every so often, we get a more extreme case where an evolution is more than just a slight power upgrade, but rather it serves to unlock a Pokemon's untapped latent potential, awakening its inner behemoth. And that's where today's video comes into play. Enter Abra and Magikarp, two of the weakest Pokemon in all of Gen 1, both of whom begin the game with do-nothing moves in the form of Splash and Teleport, and who, in a solo playthrough, have no choice but to open the game by spending hours on end, depleting their power points just for the opportunity to use Struggle against a handful of wild Pokemon, only to heal at the Poké Center and come back and repeat the process over and over again. And maybe one day I'll play through all of Pokemon Red and Blue with just an Abra or a Magikarp, but today is not that day. Instead, for this video, we'll be pitting together Abra's and Magikarp's final evolutions, the Titans of Gen 1, in a head-to-head race to see who can beat Pokemon Red and Blue the fastest. Alakazam versus Gyarados. The rules for the race are simple. To start, I'll play the entirety of Pokemon Red and Blue using only Alakazam in battle with no battle items, then I'll do the same for Gyarados. While playing, I can't use any glitches or RNG manipulation, I must save before boss battles and then reset if I lose, and finally, the winner of today's race will be determined by each Pokemon's real-world time spent completing the game while playing at 4 times speed. So before beginning the race, let's examine what Alakazam and Gyarados have going for them. For starters, both of their stats are absolutely off the charts, with Alakazam boasting the second highest special stat in the game behind only Mewtwo, and Gyarados boasting the third highest attack stat in the game behind Dragonite at the top, and Flareon, Machamp, Kingler, and Rhydon who are all tied for second. Additionally, the special stat in Gen 1 was later split into special attack and special defense in Gen 2 and beyond. So Alakazam's enormous special is really more like 2 stats rolled into one, because it functions both offensively and defensively. And finally, Alakazam's psychic typing and Gyarados' water typing are 2 of the best types for Gen 1 solo playthroughs, for reasons that I'll explain later. But now, let's take a look at our competitors' move pools, because both of them actually come with a few drawbacks. In Alakazam's case, although the handful of moves that it does learn are exceptionally powerful, namely Psychic, it gets almost nothing in the way of super effective type coverage, and the 2 moves that do fill that role, Submission and Dig, are physical moves that rely on Alakazam's much weaker attack stat of only 50. Gyarados, however, has a much deeper move pool than Alakazam, capable of inflicting super effective damage on almost anything that comes its way. But the problem here is that most of Gyarados' type coverage relies on Gyarados' formidable, yet still weaker special stat of only 100, whereas Gyarados would rather depend on its much stronger attack stat of 125. Today's race will be split into 3 parts. In Part 1, Alakazam and Gyarados will run through the game a single time to compare the results of their first attempt only. Then, after the first attempt is complete, in Part 2 both Pokemon will optimize their runs to get their time as low as possible. Then in Part 3, the Pokemon will race again to compare the results of their maximum potential. So, using this approach, it's entirely possible that either Pokemon will lose the first race, but then have more room to improve the second time around, and therefore win the second race. So, with all that explanation out of the way, as a challenge for the viewer, everyone pause the video now to make a prediction in the comments for which Pokemon you think will come out on top, explain why, then after the video is over, come back and edit your comment to describe how accurate your prediction was. And also, in addition to commenting, be sure to hit that like button, and subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another installment. And feel free to become a patron on Patreon, link in the description. Thank you so much for your support. Since you all voted overwhelmingly that Alakazam would win, our first run will be Alakazam to give Gyarados the advantage of going second. To begin the run, we must first alter the game to replace the Squirtle starter with Alakazam, causing the rival to choose Bulbasaur, reason being that I wanted to take advantage of Bulbasaur's dual poison typing, which makes it weak to psychic type attacks. In the first rival battle, Alakazam's super effective Confusion quickly dispatches a Bulbasaur, after which Alakazam's massive special allows it to one-shot all of the wild encounters leading up to Viridian Forest, at which point we skip the optional trainers entirely and take on the one mandatory trainer standing between us and Pewter City. We dispatch of his Weedle with a single Confusion and make our way to the Pewter Gym to face Brock. And on our way to the gym, most Pokemon would prefer to heal at the Poké Center, but in Alakazam's case there's no need. After all, we haven't taken a single point of damage so far, and we still have plenty of confusion power points remaining for the battle. Then, upon making it to the gym, we're already making such great time that we may as well skip the junior trainer and take on Brock as early as level 9. And in the battle, Confusion two-shots both Geodude and Onix before they even have time to know what hit them, leaving Alakazam with a Brock split of a blistering 2 minutes and 8 seconds, smashing our previous record holder Electrode's Brock split of 2 minutes and 56 seconds. So, how will Gyarados do with the Brock split? Let's see. Well, to start, we replaced the Bulbasaur starter with Gyarados, causing the rival to choose Charmander. And in the first rival battle, although Gyarados could take out the Charmander with a super effective water-type attack in the form of Hydro Pump, and yes, Gyarados begins with Hydro Pump, we instead opt for a different move that's just completely unfair this early in the game. Dragon Rage, which is a set damage move that always inflicts 40 HP, and since every Pokemon in the early game has 40 HP or less, that allows us to one-shot the rival's Charmander, as well as one-shot all the wild encounters, and the mandatory bug catcher's Weedle just as Alakazam did, to make our way to Pewter City. However, Dragon Rage does come with a slight drawback in comparison to Alakazam's Confusion because it only has 10 power points, meaning that if we encounter too many Pokemon in the wild, we'll either have to run from the encounter or heal our power points at the Poké Center prior to facing Brock. But in this case, that's actually not that likely, because in Pokemon Red and Blue, Viridian Forest has tiles of grass that don't actually spawn wild encounters, meaning that in this run, we only encounter a total of 4 Pokemon in the wild, plus the 1 Pokemon on the Bug Catcher's team, allowing us to make it to Brock with a full 5 Dragon Rage power points left, allowing Gyarados to one-shot both Geodude and Onix, and break Alakazam's short-lived record Brock split with a time of 1 minute and 59 seconds. The first sub-2 minute Brock split on this channel, by the way. So, in the first leg of the race, Gyarados begins with a narrow lead of 9 seconds. However, immediately following the Brock split, Dragon Rage's minuscule power points come back to bite Gyarados because now it has to heal at the Poké Center to restore its power points, whereas Alakazam's Confusion has a full 25 power points, which is plenty to make it through the next portion of the game without healing first. So, from the time of defeating Brock to entering the next route, Alakazam spends 28 seconds, where Gyarados spends 32 seconds. A difference that might not seem like much, but as powerful as our two competitors are, every second counts. And speaking of, that's also why I gave each Pokemon the nicknames that I did. Because at first I named Alakazam Abra as a callback to its first evolutionary form, and then I was going to name Gyarados Magikarp, but in the game, each character of a Pokemon's name takes a small fraction of a second to render every time the name appears on screen, putting Pokemon with longer names at a slight disadvantage. So, to keep Gyarados' name the same number of characters as Alakazam's, I just named it Carp instead. That way, when one Pokemon wins or loses this race, we can be confident that their name wasn't the reason. So then, after defeating Brock, both Pokemon plow their way through Route 3, although for Gyarados the power point situation continues to hold it back because on Route 3 there are 11 Pokemon, one more than the number of Dragon Rages it has available. So against one Pokemon, Gyarados has to resort to Hydro Pump, which is not totally reliable because it's only 80% accurate. Then, as Alakazam and Gyarados make it to Mount Moon, they both have to restore their power points at the Poké Center before entering the cave. At the entrance of the cave, Gyarados wastes a little bit of time by picking up the TM for Water Gun, which, although much less impressive than Dragon Rage or Hydro Pump at this point, will still assist in Gyarados' power point situation. Also while in Mount Moon, just like in Route 1 in Viridian Forest, both Alakazam and Gyarados choose to outspeed and one-shot all the wild Pokemon rather than running from the encounters, just because one-shotting versus running take about the same amount of time anyway, so in that situation you may as well gain the experience. However, in this run, Gyarados is hurt by that a lot more than Alakazam is, because at Gyarados' current level, only Dragon Rage and Hydro Pump are strong enough to one-shot, whereas Bite and Water Gun are not. And it turns out Gyarados got especially unlucky because while in Mount Moon, it encountered a total of 20 wild Pokemon, which is way above average, meaning that Gyarados actually had to run away from many of the encounters, and it even had to resort to Hydro Pump and Bite to take care of the couple mandatory trainers at the exit of the cave, even though Dragon Rage would have been able to one-shot their teams if only Gyarados had enough power points left. On the other hand, Alakazam managed to leave Mount Moon with only 7 encounters, and considering that each encounter lasts around 3 seconds, that unfortunately leaves Gyarados with over a 30-second deficit, leaving Alakazam arriving in Cerulean City at 5 minutes and 53 seconds, and Gyarados arriving in Cerulean at 6 minutes and 27 seconds. But now that we're in Cerulean, it's at this point that our competitors' paths begin to diverge, because while Gyarados heads to face Misty, Alakazam faces Rival 2. And here, as long as Alakazam can dodge Sand Attack from Pidgeotto, it should be in the clear. And indeed, Pidgeotto just uses Gust into Quick Attack before going down. Then we face Alakazam's little brother in the form of Abra, and as if just to show off its massive special, Abra takes a full 4 hits to take down with Confusion, after which Rattata and Bulbasaur are both one-shot. Then, as we trek across Nugget Bridge, literally everything is one-shot with Confusion, and as if we need yet another reason that Alakazam is so powerful in a solo playthrough, when Alakazam runs out of power points halfway across our journey, we don't even have to walk back to the Poké Center, because Alakazam can just use Teleport to be transported instantly back to Cerulean, heal up, and then head back to Nugget Bridge to resume its conquest. Then after completing the route and grabbing the SS ticket from Bill's house, we again teleport back to Cerulean, defeat the Rocket at the exit of the city for experience, then take on Misty, who is the first trainer in the run that is actually not a guaranteed win. Because although Misty's Staryu poses no threat and quickly goes down to Confusion, Starmie on the other hand has very formidable special and resists Confusion thanks to its Psychic typing. So to start, Confusion looks to be dealing about a 5th, then Starmie retaliates with Bubble Beam to also deal about a 5th. Then, after the next Confusion brings Starmie to yellow, Starmie's Tackle deals almost as much as Bubble Beam did, thanks to Alakazam's weaker defense stat. Then for the rest of the battle, both Alakazam and Starmie continue trading Confusions for Tackles, allowing us to take out the Starmie in 5 hits while surviving in the yellow. After which we leave Cerulean City on our way to Vermilion City at 10 minutes and 29 seconds. So, how does Gyarados handle the Cerulean split? Well, as I mentioned earlier, Gyarados begins by taking on Misty rather than the rival, and in the battle, although her Pokemon and mine share a mutual type resistance, Gyarados is able to break that parity with Dragon Rage, because Dragon Rage leaves Staryu hanging on the red, after which Staryu retaliates with Tackle before going down to a Bite. Then Starmie goes down to a couple more Dragon Rages for a decisive victory. And in Gyarados' case, the reason that fighting Misty before the rival was so important is because upon Misty's defeat, she awards us with the TM for Bubble Beam, which is a 100% accurate 65 power water move that Gyarados can use not only to one-shot almost everything in its path for the foreseeable future, but more importantly, it will finally provide us with enough power points to make it all the way through Nugget Bridge without backtracking to heal. So then, as we take on Rival 2, although Alakazam's Confusion didn't one-shot Pidgeotto, I still wanted to see if Hydro Pump would be enough. But it turns out not quite, because Pidgeotto survives Hydro Pump in the red. However, we still avoid Pidgeotto's Sand Attack, allowing us to knock out Pidgeotto in the next turn, and then take out the rest of the team as well. And after we make our way through Nugget Bridge, that leaves Gyarados with a Cerulean split of 10 minutes and 59 seconds. Still 30 seconds behind Alakazam, thanks to Gyarados getting so many more wild encounters in Mount Moon. Then, as our contestants make their way to the SSN at breakneck pace, Gyarados has to make a pit stop in this room to fight an extra trainer to acquire the TM for Body Slam. Then both Pokemon also fight an extra trainer to pick up a rare candy, then quickly dispense with Rival 3. However, after completing the SSN mission, Alakazam and Gyarados now have very different game plans moving forward, because while Alakazam moves on to Lieutenant Surge to take him out and win the Thunder Badge at a mere 13 minutes and 38 seconds, Gyarados, with its 4 times weakness to electric attacks, is not so confident. So Gyarados instead decides to skip the Vermilion Gym entirely and dig back to Cerulean City, with the plan of backtracking to defeat Lieutenant Surge later. Then, after digging to Cerulean City, Alakazam has enough power points between Confusion and Psybeam, and Gyarados has enough power points between Bubble Beam and Body Slam that neither Pokemon have any trouble making their way through Route 9 and Rock Tunnel to Celadon City. And because I tend to think of Celadon City as the beginning of the mid-game of the run, now's a good time to pause and take a look at where our competitors stand at this juncture in the race. So Gyarados' arrival in Celadon stands at an astounding 16 minutes and 41 seconds. By far the fastest any Pokemon has arrived in Celadon on this channel so far, with Alakazam trailing just 34 seconds behind Gyarados at 17 minutes and 15 seconds. However, keep in mind that this data is deceptive because Gyarados has not defeated Lieutenant Surge where Alakazam has, so our competitors' times are still neck and neck, and it's still anyone's race. Up next, both Pokemon make their way immediately to the department store where they pick up their usual repels, Pokédoll to skip the Marowak Ghost, and Drink to give to the Saffron City Guard. But additionally, Alakazam picks up the TM for Reflect, in preparation for some of the heavy-hitting physical attackers later down the line, and Gyarados picks up an extra Freshwater to exchange for the TM for Ice Beam, in preparation for the various flying and grass-type Pokemon. Then after completing the shopping errands, Alakazam has a decision to make, because obviously the next trainer battle is Erica thanks to Alakazam's type advantage against her poison types, but the question is whether to detour to Saffron City to pick up the TM for Psychic first, or to go ahead and face Erica now without the detour, in the hopes that the less powerful Psy Beam will be enough to get the job done. Well, in the interest of making our routing as efficient as possible, I decide on the latter, and we walk from the department store straight to the Celadon gym. However, this battle against Erica turns out to be a real lesson in humility, because against Erica's Victreebel we open with Psybeam, and Victreebel's special is strong enough that it tanks the Psybeam in red health and puts Alakazam to sleep with Sleep Powder. And although we do luckily wake up right away, since in Gen 1 you can't attack on the same turn you wake up, that gives Victreebel an opportunity to hit us with a devastating Razor Leaf to deal about a third damage before going down to another Confusion. So obviously in that scenario, we lucked out immensely because if Alakazam had stayed asleep for only a couple more turns, that would have spelled defeat and resulted in Alakazam's first reset of the run. But regardless, we then move on to Tangela, who, with its pitiful moveset of Constrict and Bind, is obviously much less of a threat, and it goes down to a couple Psybeams while Bind brings us to yellow. And finally against Vileplume, just like Victreebel, it survives Psybeam in the red, after which Alakazam's massive special allows it to brush off a Mega Drain like it's nothing and take out Vileplume in the next turn. Then, after earning the Rainbow Badge, we do what we should have done before facing Erica, and fly to Saffron City to pick up the TM for Psychic, replacing Confusion, then fly immediately over to Lavender Town to quickly dispatch of Rival 4, whose only Pokemon that isn't a one-shot is Gyarados, which I'd say is only fitting for this challenge. Then, after defeating the rival and completing the Lavender Tower mission to acquire the Pokeflute, we head over to Safari Zone to acquire the Gold Teeth and the HM for Surf. And in Safari Zone, there are also a couple vitamins in the form of a Carbos and a Protein that most Pokemon would use to boost their stats. But in Alakazam's case, we don't even bother with the vitamins at all, because Alakazam is so incredibly powerful that those stat buffs aren't even worth the few seconds that it would take to pick up the vitamins and use them in the first place. And by the way, I should also mention here that our comprehensive rules for this run ban the use of store-bought vitamins, but found vitamins are fair game. So after we finish the Safari Zone mission, we dig back to Fuchsia City, grab the HM for Strength, then head straight over to the Fuchsia Gym. And in this gym, the mandatory trainers are unironically a much greater threat than the gym leader himself. Because although our odds of blacking out here are still pretty low, the Drowsy, Hypno, and Kadabra can all confuse you, and the Drowsy and Hypno can inflict both sleep and poison. And indeed, in the battle against this first juggler, the last Drowsy does actually confuse Alakazam, and it hits itself in confusion once, but we still manage to win the battle in the green, defeat the next gym trainer as well, and take on Koga. And in this battle, it won't surprise you that Psychic one-shots the whole team for a flawless victory, winning us the Soul Badge at 26 minutes and 44 seconds. However, Gyarados' post-Celadon routing is quite different from Alakazam's. First of all, because Gyarados has not yet defeated Lieutenant Surge, and because Surge's Thunder Badge is required for using Fly outside of battle, after obtaining the HM for Fly, we have to walk through Celadon and Saffron City back to Vermilion to face him next. And in the battle, the opening Voltorb just barely survives a Bubble Beam, but admittedly we probably should have gone for Body Slam, since Voltorb's defense is so much weaker than its special. But it makes no difference because Voltorb just retaliates with a tackle that does all of 3 damage before going down in the next turn. Then against Pikachu, I learned from my mistake and use Body Slam to one-shot, after which Raichu survives Body Slam in the red and deals about half with Thunder Shock. And in this case, given that Thunderbolt is over twice as powerful as Thunder Shock, that means that a Thunderbolt from Raichu definitely would have resulted in Gyarados' first reset. But in this case, we survive and knock out the Raichu on the next turn with one final Body Slam, not only winning us the Thunder Badge, but more importantly allowing us to use Fly outside of battle to traverse the map much more efficiently, and also granting us access to the TM for Thunderbolt, which will serve as a fantastic coverage move against opposing Water-type Pokemon, especially other Gyarados. So now that Gyarados has been endowed with such incredible type coverage in the form of Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, and Bubble Beam, and also Body Slam, which can't actually inflict super effective damage, but is still a great catch-all move, we head over to Lavender Town to face Rival 4, who doesn't stand a chance against our impressive type diversity, and Pidgeotto goes down to Ice Beam, Execute goes down to Ice Beam, the opposing Gyarados goes down to Thunderbolt, Kadabra goes down to Body Slam, and Charmeleon goes down to Bubble Beam for yet another flawless victory. However, this exact point in the run is where Gyarados is unfortunately going to start running into some trouble, for a couple reasons. For starters, you may have noticed that Gyarados is currently at a much lower level than Alakazam, with Alakazam being at level 33 and Gyarados being at only level 28. And that's not an accident, because it turns out that one major advantage that Alakazam has over Gyarados is that Gyarados belongs to what's called the slow experience group, whereas Alakazam belongs to the medium slow experience group, meaning that Gyarados requires more experience than Alakazam to jump from one level to the next, which really doesn't bode well for Gyarados, because now we've reached the point in a typical Gen 1 playthrough that the level curve of the enemy Pokemon are going to start catching up to us, making their teams much more difficult to defeat. Additionally, the second reason that Gyarados will struggle in the upcoming mid-game of the run is that, as impressive as Gyarados' type coverage is, it still doesn't have a clean answer for dealing with powerful Poison-type Pokemon, because it obviously doesn't learn any Psychic-type moves, and it doesn't get access to Earthquake until Gen 3. So, as we head to the Safari Zone to pick up the HM for Surf and replace Bubble Beam, we then head over to the Fuchsia Gym to face Koga with access to 0 super effective moves. And on top of all that, Gyarados is only at level 31, a full 12 points below Koga's ace Weezing. And against Koga, our strategy is just to spam Surf and hope for the best. So to kick off the battle, Surf does about 2/3 to Coughing, then Koga uses an X attack and Coughing goes down in the next turn. Out comes Muck. Surf deals just under half and Koga uses another X attack. The next Surf brings Muck to yellow and Koga uses a third X attack before Muck goes down in the next turn. Out comes the second Coughing. Surf deals about 2/3 and you'll never guess what happens next. That's right, Koga uses a fourth X attack and Coughing goes down. Wow, that was incredible. In all my days of playing Pokemon, I've never seen Koga use that many X attacks in a row. But finally against Weezing, after we hit Weezing with Surf, Koga decides to do something actually productive in the form of Sludge, which also poisons us. Then for the rest of the battle, we spam Surf while Weezing spams Sludge, and although our last Surf looked like it was just barely going to get the knockout, Weezing hangs on by a thread and knocks us out with one final Sludge attack, resulting in Gyarados' first reset of the run. In the next attempt, we employ the same strategy again by spamming Surf, the difference being that this time the first Coughing gets off a weak tackle before going down, and Muck not only gets off a couple Sludges, but also requires one more attack to knock out thanks to boosting its evasion with Minimize. Then Surf one-shots the next Coughing thanks to a critical hit, but now against Weezing we only have red health remaining, and we faint to a Self Destruct. So, considering that in our first attempt against Koga, we got some of the best luck ever in the form of his first 3 Pokemon not even declaring an attack, and we still lost, and in the second attempt our victory was even further out of reach, I decide at that point to abandon Koga for the time being, and instead head to Sylph to face Rival 5. And in this battle, again thanks to Gyarados' slow experience group, we're still extremely underleveled in comparison to the enemy Pokemon. And not only that, the battle starts off in the most annoying way possible, because the super effective Ice Beam only deals about 2/3 to Pidgeot, who retaliates with Sand Attack to lower our accuracy. Then unfortunately the next Ice Beam misses, but Pidgeot just goes for a Whirlwind which has no effect in battle. So I guess a net neutral exchange there. Then Pidgeot goes down in the next turn, and just to demonstrate how underleveled Gyarados really is, Ice Beam doesn't even one-shot the Execute, who retaliates with Leech Seed before going down. But thankfully in the next portion of the fight, our bad luck starts to turn around because the opposing Gyarados can't stand up to a 4 times effective Thunderbolt, and Alakazam just uses a failed Disable before fainting to a critical hit Body Slam. And finally we go into Charizard with plenty of HP remaining, allowing us to tank its Slash attack in the yellow, then retaliate with Surf to bring Charizard to yellow, after which Charizard just leers before one more Surf gets the job done. So at this point, Gyarados is now a full 4 levels higher than when it first attempted Koga, but I still don't think we're quite ready to face him. Not to mention that our defeat of Rival 5 unlocks the door to the Saffron Gym where we can take on Sabrina. And although we don't have any super effective coverage against her Psychic-type Pokemon, at the very least her Pokemon have much lower defense in comparison to Koga's Pokemon that are far more bulky. So upon heading to the Saffron Gym to face Sabrina, my hope is that we'll be able to ride Gyarados' monstrous attack stat to victory by spamming Body Slam. So, let's kick off the battle and see if Body Slam will be enough to get the job done. To start, Sabrina's opening Kadabra outspeeds and leads with Psychic to deal about a third. And although Kadabra is so frail that Body Slam knocks it out, that's really not good news, because that means that the upcoming Alakazam will easily get the knockout if it behaves like Kadabra just did. Plus, we also have Mr. Mime and Venomoth to get through. And against Mr. Mime, although we do manage to outspeed, our Body Slam only deals about 2/3, and rather than Mr. Mime opting for any one of its useless moves in the form of Light Screen, Barrier, or Double Slap, it instead retaliates with a devastating critical hit Confusion to bring us into low yellow. Then we knock it out on the next turn and go into Venomoth, who takes half damage from Body Slam and then paralyzes us with Stun Spore, allowing it to outspeed on the next turn with Psybeam to bring us into red. Then, although we do power through the paralysis to knock out the Venomoth, that only leaves us with a tiny bit of health going into Alakazam, who will obviously knock us out if it hits us even a single time. But it turns out that this battle against Alakazam is one of the sorriest performances from Alakazam that I've ever seen, because it just absolutely refuses to do anything relevant the entire time. To start, it opens with its signature big brain strat of recovering at full health, then Body Slam deals just over half, and Alakazam recovers back up to almost full. Well, at least the second recover made sense. Then our next Body Slam paralyzes the Alakazam, but since Gyarados and Alakazam are both paralyzed, and Alakazam is faster anyway, Alakazam still outspeeds and yet again uses recover, after which another Body Slam brings it to yellow, then Alakazam goes for Psy Wave which misses, and one more Body Slam knocks out the Alakazam for the win. And while we're at it, I also want to mention that that battle was extremely unlikely. First of all, because Alakazam is 1 in 4 to use Psybeam and never used it over the course of 4 turns. Second of all, because Paralysis is 1 in 4 to prevent a Pokemon from attacking, and that never happened over the course of 7 turns. That is, 5 turns for Gyarados, 2 turns for Alakazam, and third of all because Psywave is only 1 in 5 to miss. So if you do the math, you find that all of that works out to only around 3% for all of that to happen in succession like it just did. So yeah, that battle was certainly a wild ride, but for now, all we can do is accept the victory and continue on with the run. So up next, we head back to the Celadon Gym to face Erica. And despite having a super effective move against Erica's Grass-type Pokemon in the form of Ice Beam, I still intentionally delayed this fight until now, because Erica's Victory Bell actually has quite a threatening moveset of Sleep Powder, Poison Powder, Wrap, and Razor Leaf. So if it manages to put you to sleep, or put you in the infamous Poison Powder Wrap Lock, it can deal some serious damage if not knock you out entirely. So because of that, I wanted to be sure that our attacks would one-shot Erica's team before attempting the fight. But now, I think Gyarados has reached a high enough level that it shouldn't be an issue. So to start, Gyarados opens with Ice Beam, but to my dismay, Victory Bell spites both the level gap and the super effective damage by surviving the attack in the red, only to put Gyarados to sleep with Sleep Powder in the next turn. Then after Erica heals Victory Bell with a Super Potion, Victory Bell spams Razor Leaf to bring us all the way down to red health before Gyarados eventually wakes up and knocks out the Victory Bell with another Ice Beam. Then, although Tangela's special is so poor that Ice Beam takes care of it no problem, Vileplume also just barely hangs on in the red, but fortunately just goes for a Petal Dance that leaves Gyarados surviving on just 7 health before going down. So at this point in the run, I definitely felt the adverse effects of Gyarados' slow level up rate starting to set in, because while Gyarados only has 2 more resets than Alakazam so far, Gyarados' battles have overall felt much less certain than Alakazam's, where Alakazam's battles have felt much more consistent. But thankfully Gyarados does get a bit of a reprieve from that uncertainty in the next several fights, because up next we head back to Fuchsia City to face against Koga once more. And this time the battle goes much more smoothly, because at the higher level, Gyarados one-shots the first Coughing with a critical hit Surf, 2-shots Muck, with Muck dealing about a quarter damage before going down, then the second Coughing survives Surf in the red, and gets off a Smog that does almost nothing, and finally Weezing is 3-shot without dealing any damage at all, thanks to a Smog that misses followed by an X attack, meaning that we finally gotten past Koga in relatively painless fashion this time around. And then in the last 2 gym battles of the Pokemon League, I don't think it will surprise you that Gyarados goes on to ride its formidable stats and type advantage to victory against Blaine and Giovanni by spamming Surf until the battle is over, leaving Gyarados with the Giovanni split of 36 minutes and 47 seconds. But now, as we check in with Alakazam, remember that Alakazam and Gyarados are fighting many of the boss trainers in a different order than one another. So, although Alakazam has defeated Koga, it still has yet to take on Rival 5 or Sabrina. So, let's check to see how Alakazam handles those particular fights. Well, to start against Rival 5, Alakazam goes into the fight at level 38, a full 6 levels above Gyarados, who went in at only level 32. So at this point, we can definitely see a clear level advantage for Alakazam, which will only become more exaggerated as the run progresses. Against Pidgeot, Psychic comes just shy of the knockout, but Pidgeot's wing attack does almost nothing before going down. Then Psychic lands a critical hit on Gyarados, who just barely survives, after which the rival uses a potion. And yes, that is just a potion, not a super potion or a hyper potion, because every rival besides the champion is programmed with the same healing items. So because of that, the next Psybeam gets the knockout in the next turn. Then Growlithe is one-shot with a super effective Dig, and against the opposing Alakazam, we also go for Dig because of its resistance to our other Psychic type attacks. The Dig deals about half, the opposing Alakazam disables our Psychic, and another Dig takes it out. And finally against Venusaur, we can't use Psychic because of the disable, but a super effective critical hit Psybeam is still more than enough to get the knockout. And rather than Alakazam heading to face Sabrina like Gyarados did, now that we've completed the Silphco mission and acquired Lapras to use Surf, that allows us to head down to Cinnabar Island to face Blaine. And although this fight is not whatsoever a challenge, it does however show us just how superior Alakazam's special stat is in comparison to its attack. Because against the opening Growlithe, we open with a super effective Dig which doesn't knock out the Growlithe, then the Growlithe just leers and we take it out on the next turn. Then against both Ponyta and Rapidash, Psychic gets the knockout. Although to be fair, the one against Rapidash was a critical hit, which may have mattered in that case. However, against Arcanine, just to test which move would deal more damage, we open with Dig, which deals just under half, then Arcanine retaliates with a critical hit Ember to deal about a quarter, then Psychic deals just over half. So in this case, even with Dig being super effective, it was still more profitable just to go with Psychic. But regardless, in the next turn, Arcanine just goes for another weak Ember, and then promptly goes down to Psybeam for the win. But now that we've defeated Blaine, the only other boss trainer that Alakazam can possibly face at this point is Sabrina, who is unironically the most threatening boss trainer in the entire game for Alakazam, precisely because in Gen 1, the only type to resist Psychic is Psychic itself. So getting past her team's defenses could prove to be a challenge if we're not careful. However, also keep in mind as we head into the battle that we do have a saving grace in the form of Dig, because although Alakazam's attack isn't that impressive, neither is the opening Kadabra's defense, allowing us to one-shot Kadabra with a critical hit Dig. Then against Mr. Mime, although Mr. Mime's defense is much stronger than Kadabra's, we still go for Dig because of Mr. Mime's resistance to Psychic, and again we get a critical hit to bring it down to red, after which Mr. Mime goes for a double slap, which does almost nothing thanks to double slap's low base power, and Mr. Mime goes down in the next turn. Then up next, Venomoth is the one Pokemon on Sabrina's team that's completely trivial because its poison typing makes it weak to Psychic, and it goes down in one hit. But against Sabrina's ace Alakazam, this battle turns out to be extremely awkward, because the way Sabrina's AI works is that it deprioritizes Psychic type moves against an opposing Psychic type Pokemon, the result of which is that Sabrina's Alakazam will always spam Recover, since Recover is its only non-Psychic type move. And because none of our attacking moves can deal more damage than Recover restores, we only have 3 paths to victory, which are 1. Get multiple critical hits, or 2. For Psychic to get a special drop so that the following attacks will deal more damage, or 3. For Psybeam to inflict confusion. And in this fight, although we did get a handful of critical hits, and Sabrina's Alakazam did become confused once, and we even got a special drop with Psychic at the very end, none of that was quite enough to get the job done before we ran out of power points, forcing us to reset. And in this case, that's devastating news for Alakazam, because if Alakazam can't manage to defeat Sabrina in a timely fashion, that could be exactly what Gyarados needs to pull ahead. But fortunately for Alakazam, on only the second attempt, we again make it back to the opposing Alakazam no problem, and this time, an early Psychic drops the Alakazam special, meaning that all of the following Psychics are dealing slightly more damage per turn than Alakazam can recover, allowing us to slowly chip its health down to 0. And after this battle was over, I thought, you know, it's only fitting that the one trainer that Alakazam would have to attempt multiple times would be the Psychic-type gym leader. But in any case, after Sabrina is defeated, Alakazam heads to the Viridian Gym and presses the A button a few times to quickly dispatch of Giovanni, which means that Alakazam and Gyarados have collected all 8 gym badges. So now, let's once again check our competitors' scores to see how they stack up. Wow, talk about neck and neck. At this juncture, even in spite of Alakazam's and Gyarados' routing across the Kanto map being so wildly different from one another, that still leaves Alakazam's time of 36 minutes and 39 seconds, only 8 seconds ahead of Gyarados' time of 36 minutes and 47 seconds. I'll be honest, I absolutely did not expect to witness such a tight race between these two Pokemon. I figured at the very least, one Pokemon would at some point hit a stumbling block that the other Pokemon would breeze past. And although that did happen somewhat, in this case, it happened about equally for both Pokemon, because Gyarados wasted a little bit of time by backtracking to defeat Lieutenant Surge, and by resetting a couple times at Koga, and Alakazam wasted time against Sabrina. And even though Alakazam does have fewer resets than Gyarados so far, the one reset that Alakazam does have took an especially long time due to how drawn out the battle was. So it looks like moving forward, the winner of this race will be the Pokemon that has an easier time against the last 6 battles of the run, starting with the pre-league rival. And as usual, we'll begin by showing Alakazam's battle first. To kick off the fight, the rival leads with Pidgeot, who deals about a third with a critical hit wing attack before going down to a Psychic and a Psybeam. Then Rhyhorn goes down to Psychic, and Gyarados takes about half from Psychic and retaliates with Dragon Rage to bring us to a quarter health. Then after Gyarados faints, we one-shot Growlithe, and now out comes the rival's Alakazam. And in this battle, I actually came up with a different strategy than the one we used for Sabrina, which is to inflict Alakazam with the compounding poison damage of Toxic, the TM for which we picked up from Koga. However, in this fight, I actually underestimate how much damage the opposing Alakazam would deal in spite of our type resistance, because at first I go for Toxic, but it misses and we get taken out with a critical hit Psychic. So in hindsight, I realize I definitely should have used Recover in that situation just to play it safe, but regardless, on the next attempt, we make it back to Alakazam in green health and successfully poison it with Toxic this time. And now that the opposing Alakazam is poisoned, the only thing that we really have to be cautious of is not using so many Psychics that we run out of power points going into Venusaur. So instead, we just use Recover a couple times just to make absolutely sure that we don't get knocked out while we patiently wait for the compounding poison damage to accumulate. Then once Alakazam's health is low enough, we take it out with a couple more Psychics, after which Venusaur doesn't stand a chance, and we knock it out with 2 more Psychics as well, allowing Alakazam to move on to Victory Road at 38 minutes and 58 seconds. Alright, let's see how Gyarados fares against the rival. Well, to prepare for the fight, since Gyarados is quite underleveled, we feed a total of 8 rare candies up to level 49, which puts Gyarados as many as 4 levels below the rival's team. But with Gyarados' slow level up rate, that's the best we can do for now. To kick off the battle, Ice Beam comes just shy of knocking out the opening Pidgeot, who gets off a very weak wing attack before going down. Then Rhyhorn, Execute, and Gyarados are all one-shot thanks to our super effective type coverage. Alakazam, however, outspeeds and lands a devastating critical hit Psychic to bring Gyarados to low yellow. But luckily the Psychic also gets a clutch special drop to badge boost Gyarados' speed, allowing Gyarados to retaliate with Body Slam to bring Alakazam to red, followed by outspeeding Alakazam in the next turn with another Body Slam for the knockout. Then out comes the rival's Ace Charizard, who could easily knock out Gyarados with Slash, but in this case we use Surf to bring Charizard to yellow, then Charizard just uses Rage to bring Gyarados to red, and Charizard goes down in the next turn, allowing Gyarados to head to the Pokemon League at 38 minutes and 3 seconds, meaning that Gyarados has pulled ahead of Alakazam by a full 55 seconds. And as close as this race is, that lead is huge, so Gyarados definitely has a chance at victory if it can simply sustain that lead. And as our competitors make their way through Victory Road, let's talk about my prediction for how the Elite Four will go down. First, there's Lorelei. Gyarados obviously has the type advantage because of its access to Thunderbolt, plus Lorelei's AI will never use Ice-type attacks because of Gyarados' water typing. Also, Lorelei has not 1 but 2 Psychic Pokemon that resist Alakazam's Psychic-type attacks, which could allow Gyarados to pull ahead even further. Then after Lorelei comes Bruno. And call me crazy, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Bruno will not be a challenge for either Pokemon. Agatha, however, could possibly be the deciding factor of this race, because Alakazam will win the battle with ease, while Gyarados will require a little bit more luck to get past her in a timely fashion. Then in the Lance battle, I'm again giving the advantage to Gyarados because of its type advantage, and the fact that Alakazam could potentially fold to Hyper Beam. And finally, the champion battle is so varied in the sorts of challenges that it presents to both Alakazam and Gyarados that I'm calling this one a toss-up. So, how will Alakazam and Gyarados handle the Elite Four? To find out, let's start with Alakazam's battle against Lorelei. To kick off the fight, Lorelei sends out Dewgong, and luckily Psychic gets a critical hit for the one-shot. Psychic then leaves Cloyster hanging on in the red, who retaliates with Spike Cannon, which does very little before going down. Then, because of Slowbro's resistance to Psychic-type attacks, we employ the same strategy as we did against the rival's Alakazam by using Toxic, after which Slowbro does very little with Water Gun. Then our next Psychic gets a critical hit to deal massive damage to Slowbro, and Slowbro uses Withdraw before going down to one more Psybeam. Against Jinx, we again go for Toxic because Jinx is also part Psychic, and Jinx initiates with Thrash to deal about a quarter. And because I want to be as prepared for Lapras with as much HP as possible, we just spam Recover while we patiently wait for the toxic damage to accumulate. And once Jinx is in the red, we take it out with one more Psybeam and go into Lapras with full health just as planned. And finally against Lapras, we go for Psychic, which gets a critical hit to bring Lapras to red, then Lapras goes for Hydro Pump, which Alakazam tanks no problem because of its excellent special, and Lapras goes down to one more Psybeam. Alright, so that was a pretty convincing performance from Alakazam. Let's see if Gyarados can match it. To begin against Dewgong, Thunderbolt 2-shots with Dewgong getting off a weak takedown, and against Cloyster, Thunderbolt brings it to Super Potion range and it goes down in the next turn. Then against Slowbro, Thunderbolt does about 2/3, and Slowbro uses Amnesia to raise its special, meaning the next Thunderbolt doesn't quite knock it out. Then Slowbro uses Growl, which is fantastic news because, yes, it drops our attack, but it also badge boosts all our other stats, after which Slowbro goes down. Against Jinx, we go for Body Slam even in spite of the lowered attack, just because Jinx's defense stat is so poor. And luckily we get a critical hit to one-shot, meaning we go into Lapras with green health remaining. And at first, all seemed to be going well, because Thunderbolt deals about half, and Lapras's Body Slam doesn't even deal a quarter. Then our next Thunderbolt brings Lapras to red. However, Lapras's next Body Slam paralyzes, thus allowing it to outspeed in the next turn with a critical hit, and to make matters worse, in the next turn Gyarados is trapped in paralysis, preventing it from attacking, allowing one more Body Slam from Lapras to get the knockout. So that's extremely unfortunate for Gyarados, because that obviously hands the lead in the race back to Alakazam. And although in the next attempt at Lorelei, Gyarados makes it back to Lapras in green health just like last time, and manages to take out the Lapras with a few Thunderbolts no issue, that time deficit for Gyarados may very well be just what Alakazam needed to come out on top. Not to mention, we all know that Alakazam will breeze past Bruno and Agatha, so if Gyarados wants to surpass Alakazam, it will have to do so at either Lance or the champion. But first, we still need to see how fast Gyarados can get past Agatha. Well, against the opening Gengar, it's really not looking good for Gyarados, because Gengar outspeeds and opens with Confuse Ray, and Gyarados hits itself in confusion, followed by a Nightshade to deal about a third. Then Gyarados lands a critical hit Surf to deal about 2/3, which means that a non-critical hit Surf wouldn't have even dealt half. Then after Gengar uses another Nightshade, Gyarados hits itself in confusion yet again, then takes out Gengar with Surf. Now going into Golbat, we go for Blizzard, which has since replaced Ice Beam, and Golbat goes down no problem. Then we outspeed Haunter and Surf deals about half, but then Haunter puts us to sleep. Then fortunately Gyarados wakes up in the next turn, just in time to dodge Haunter's Dream Eater, and Haunter goes down to another Surf. However, against Arbok, Surf only brings it to yellow and it knocks out Gyarados with Acid. And now, I'm not going to give a play-by-play of all the rest of our attempts at Agatha, but suffice to say that this particular fight turns out to be Gyarados' Achilles heel, because Gyarados simply does not have the tools necessary for overcoming this challenge, because literally all we can do is just spam Surf and hope that Agatha's random AI will select just the right sequence of moves to allow us to get past her, which is certainly possible as long as she uses nothing but status moves such as Hypnosis, Confuse Ray, or Glare that continue to miss, or use Dream Eater while Gyarados is awake. But with Gyarados needing to get through a team of 5 Pokemon, eventually Gyarados' luck is bound to run out at some point. And it turns out that we had to reset this battle a total of 5 times before winning on the 6th attempt, in which Agatha used just enough useless attacks to allow us to go into her final Gengar at yellow health, after which Gengar uses Toxic, takes about a third from Surf, then uses Confuse Ray, but we power through the confusion and land one more critical hit Surf for the knockout. So because of all those resets, Gyarados now has an extremely steep hill to climb, because Gyarados currently lags behind Alakazam by 1 minute and 47 seconds, meaning that if Gyarados wants to win, it will require that Gyarados sweep past Lance in the champion, while Alakazam stumbles in at least one of those battles, just like Gyarados did with Agatha. So, in light of that, let's see how our competitors fare against Lance. Well, in Alakazam's case, we prepare by teaching Reflect to brace against Hyper Beam, and against Lance's Gyarados that plan works beautifully, because after we open with Reflect, Gyarados right on cue opens with Hyper Beam, which only deals about a third before Alakazam's Psychic takes it down to yellow. And even though Psychic didn't one-shot, we can still take advantage of Gyarados' recharge turn to knock it out with impunity. Then against Dragonair, just to play it as safe as possible, we use Recover to heal back to full, and Dragonair uses Dragon Raid. Then both Dragonairs and the Aerodactyl are all quickly taken care of with Psychic, and since Dragonite has much better special than the previous 3 Pokemon, it survives a Psychic and retaliates with Slam, which Alakazam survives thanks to the Reflect, and one more Psychic takes out the Dragonite, allowing Alakazam to move on to the champion at 45 minutes and 5 seconds. So, how does Gyarados handle Lance? Well, Gyarados does have super effective coverage for Lance's entire team, but immediately as we begin the fight, we see that that might not be enough, because Thunderbolt leaves the opposing Gyarados hanging on by a thread, after which it retaliates with Hyper Beam to deal almost half. But then the rest of the battle goes about as well as it possibly could, because Lance's Gyarados goes down to another Thunderbolt, then the 2 Dragonairs are outsped in one shot with a super effective Blizzard. Then Aerodactyl does outspeed, but just misses with Supersonic before being one-shot, and finally we outspeed and one-shot the Dragonite as well, placing Gyarados' Lance Split at 46 minutes and 9 seconds. Still 1 minute and 4 seconds behind Alakazam. Granted, Gyarados has gained 43 seconds on Alakazam since the Agatha fight, thanks to how expediently Gyarados defeated Lance. So it's still anyone's race, depending on which Pokemon has an easier time against the champion. Alright, this is it. The final battle to determine the winner. Which Pokemon will come out on top? Let's find out. To kick off Alakazam's battle, the champion leads with Pidgeot, and to brace for the oncoming attacks, Alakazam opens with Reflect, and Pidgeot uses Mirror Move for a Reflect of its own, then goes down to a critical hit Psychic. Then against the opposing Alakazam, we use the same strategy as we did against the previous rival's Alakazam by opening with Toxic, after which we spam Recover, even while we're at full health, just to make absolutely certain that we have enough Psychic power points for the rest of the team. And after a long exchange of attacks, followed by recovering from those attacks, the champion's Alakazam eventually goes down, and we move on to Rhydon, who, because of its poor special, obviously goes down to a single Psychic. Now out comes Gyarados. We open with Psychic to deal about half, and thankfully Gyarados just goes for Hydro Pump instead of Hyper Beam, which only brings us to about half health before one more Psychic takes out the Gyarados, and we move on to Arcanine. And against Arcanine, Alakazam's health is just high enough that I don't see the need for Recover, and we just spam Psychic to take the Arcanine out on only 2 hits, after which a super effective Psychic takes out the Venusaur, making us champion of the Pokemon League. So congratulations to Alakazam, because it turns out that Gyarados begins its champion fight at the exact same time that Alakazam finished its champion fight. So it looks like for this first round, Alakazam is the winner. But just for posterity's sake, let's see how Gyarados fares against the champion. As usual, the champion leads with Pidgeot, and in this case, I wasn't sure if Blizzard would one-shot, so I debated between Blizzard and Thunderbolt. But I eventually settle on Blizzard, and Pidgeot survives in the red. And just like against Alakazam, Pidgeot again uses Mirror Move for a Blizzard of its own to deal about a quarter before going down. However, against the champion's Alakazam is where Gyarados begins to run into some trouble, because our plan is to use Hyper Beam, which will most certainly knock it out as long as it doesn't use Reflect. But alas, it outspeeds and opens with Reflect, causing the Hyper Beam to only deal about 2/3, after which Alakazam recovers not once but twice back up to full health. And now, our plan is just to spam Hyper Beam, because Hyper Beam will still deal more damage than any of our special moves, even in spite of the Reflect, and even in spite of Hyper Beam's recharge turn. But unfortunately, Alakazam continuing to use Recover at just the right moment, in conjunction with a critical hit Psybeam on the last turn, eventually knock out Gyarados and forces yet another reset. So, it looks like moving forward, our path to victory will require Alakazam opening with some other move besides Reflect, so that Hyper Beam can knock it out on the first turn. And indeed, in the next attempt, we go into Alakazam at full health, and Alakazam opens with Psybeam to deal about a quarter and goes down to Hyper Beam. Then obviously Rhydon is one-shot with Surf, and Exeggutor is two-shot with Blizzard. However, just like Lance's Gyarados, the champion's Gyarados also survives Thunderbolt on a sliver and retaliates with a Hyper Beam to bring us to red before going down. Then last is Charizard, and although Gyarados has the type advantage, Charizard has the speed advantage and it knocks out Gyarados with Rage. But then in the third attempt at the champion, we finally get a run that goes our way, because Gyarados one-shots Pidgeot to go into Alakazam at full health, and although against Alakazam the first Hyper Beam misses, allowing it to get off a Psychic, just like against the previous rival, the Psychic gets a clutch special drop to badge boost Gyarados' speed, allowing Gyarados to outspeed on the next turn, and go for another Hyper Beam which lands this time for the knockout. Then after getting past Rhydon, the initial Blizzard on Exeggutor gets a freeze, and now since Exeggutor is frozen, in a slight lapse of judgment I switch switch to Thunderbolt because it has better accuracy in comparison to Blizzard. But Thunderbolt only deals a blip, and I quickly realize my mistake and knock out the Exeggutor with one more critical hit Blizzard. Then, after the first Thunderbolt on the opposing Gyarados, it fortunately misses with Hyper Beam, allowing one more Thunderbolt to get the knockout, meaning that we move on to Charizard with enough health to tank anything that comes our way. And this time, because of the earlier badge boost, we outspeed with Surf to bring it to yellow, Charizard uses Rage, and one more Surf knocks out the Charizard, making us champion of the Pokemon League. Results: Alakazam finished the game in 2 hours and 57 minutes game time, 46 minutes and 51 seconds real time, while Gyarados finished the game in 3 hours and 3 minutes game time, 49 minutes and 9 seconds real time, meaning that Alakazam decisively wins the preliminary race by 2 minutes and 18 seconds. However, I'm still quite unsatisfied with both Alakazam's and Gyarados' performance, because I believe that with the proper optimization, both Pokemon have the potential to complete the game with times that are much faster. In fact, here in a moment we're about to begin some optimization tests, and after that optimization is complete, my goal for both of these Pokemon is to bring their time all the way down to below 40 minutes. That's right, we're shooting for a sub 40 run, which, if we're successful, will be the first time that that's ever happened on this channel. Now, granted, I don't know if sub 40 is actually possible, because Alakazam has almost 7 minutes to shave off its time in order to meet that goal, and in the case of Gyarados, we have over 9 minutes to find some way of getting rid of. But still, if any two Pokemon can pull off this incredible feat, it's Alakazam and Gyarados, and I have high hopes for them both. So, let's get right into it, starting with Alakazam. The beginning of the game is no different than it was before, using Confusion to sweep through Route 1, Viridian Forest, the Pewter Gym, Route 3, and Mount Moon. However, upon making it to Cerulean City, we come across one very important consideration when it comes to speedrunning, which is finding the optimal time to heal at the Poké Centers. And to be fair, most Pokemon probably wouldn't bother with such a small time save, but when you're playing a Pokemon as powerful as Alakazam where every second counts, these small incremental advantages are the sorts of things you have to think about. So in this case, since in the first run we ran out of Confusion power points halfway across Nugget Bridge, here it's actually best to heal at the Poké Center immediately after defeating Rival 2, which leaves Alakazam with just enough power points to make it all the way across Nugget Bridge without backtracking prior to Misty. And throughout this run, finding a route that allows us to heal as little as possible will be a running theme as we progress. For example, upon arriving in Celadon, it's actually not necessary to heal at this Poké Center either, because our battles on the SS Sand, Route 9, and Mount Moon used up all of our Confusion power points, but because our plan is to use the TM for Psychic to replace Confusion prior to the next battle, that will serve the dual purpose of restoring our power points, thus allowing us to skip the Poké Center, and also making the Erica fight much faster, considering that her Pokemon were just shy of a one-shot with Psybeam in the first run, whereas this time Psychic easily takes out her Victreebel and Vileplume in one hit. And speaking of the Erica battle, another nifty optimization that I came up with is to use the fight against Tangela as an opportunity to heal with Recover, again allowing us to skip the upcoming Poké Center in Lavender Town in preparation for Rival 4 if our health ever gets too low beforehand. And now, I'll go ahead and give you a little spoiler that literally every battle from now until the end of the game is won very consistently for Alakazam, meaning that from here on out, the only component of the run that needs any optimization is PowerPoint management, in the sense that we need to find exactly how many trainers we're able to fight, with what moves and in what order before we have to heal at a Poké Center, precisely to bring the number of times that we have to heal over the course of the run to a minimum. For example, Psybeam, rather than Psychic, is sufficient for most of Lavender Tower, after which Dig is sufficient for the jugglers in the Fuchsia Gym, after which Psybeam is sufficient for both of Koga's Coughings, but not the Muck or the Wheezing, which requires Psychic instead. And as proof that this routing is particularly effective, after we complete the Safari Zone mission, we dig out of Safari Zone all the way back to Cerulean City, because the process of learning new moves to restore the power points of old moves, in addition to using Recover to heal our HP, in addition to stepping on the healing pad in Lavender Tower, were all sufficient to completely avoid the Poké Centers from Cerulean all the way to Saffron after defeating Koga. But now in Saffron, before entering Silphco, we finally reached a point where we have to heal, because our plan is to replace Psybeam with Toxic in preparation for Rival 5's Alakazam, meaning that we won't have enough power points remaining between Psychic and Dig to take care of all the trainers in Sylph. But nevertheless, we then head into Silphco, and as expected, Alakazam has no trouble dispatching of Rival 5 and completing the Silphco mission. However, after we finish with Silphco, we have a decision to make about who to fight next, Blaine or Sabrina, because heading to Cinnabar Island to fight Blaine has the benefit that his Volcano badge grants a permanent 12.5% boost to your team's special stat, which would obviously make Sabrina much easier, but then again, if that special boost is not necessary to defeat Sabrina, then defeating her first would be faster because it would mean that we don't have to backtrack to Saffron later. So to test that, we head to the Saffron gym to see whether the Sabrina fight is consistent without the badge boost from Blaine. And in the battle, it turns out that Kadabra is somewhat annoying because we're going into this fight at a lower level than we did last time, meaning that Kadabra survives Dig in the red, allowing Sabrina to heal with a Hyper Potion, thus wasting time. But even still, Kadabra is not actually a threat whatsoever, and neither is Mr. Mime or Venomoth, meaning that as long as we inflict Sabrina's ace Alakazam with Toxic, we should be in the clear. And just as I suspected, this battle is totally consistent with no need for the badge boost. Not to mention this particular battle was Alakazam's greatest waste of time in the first run, so the consistency of this battle in future runs will be an enormous boon to Alakazam's final score. Then, as we progress through the next portion of the game, every battle leading up to the Elite Four is totally consistent, with Rival 6's Venusaur cleanly leveling us up so as to maximize the experience that we gain from our rare candies in preparation for Lorelei. But now, as we head into Lorelei's chamber, there are two strategies that we have to consider for this fight, specifically against Jinx, because in the first run, we used Toxic to take care of Jinx, but it might actually be more profitable to use Dig, just because Dig is a two-shot on Jinx, where Toxic takes many more turns to get the job done. But in my testing, the problem I found with that is that both Dugong and Slowbro know the move Growl to drop our attack stat and make the Dig much weaker, not to mention using Dig prevents us from healing with Recover in preparation for Lapras. So ultimately I decided the best play is to spam Psychic for everything leading up to Jinx, then if Dugong or Slowbro do not use Growl, use Dig for Jinx, and if they do use Growl, use Toxic instead, at which point we recover going into Lapras, then use Psychic for Lapras as well. And now that we've optimized the battle against Lorelei, that's all the testing there is left to be done for Alakazam. Because I don't think it will surprise you that Bruno, Agatha, Lance, and the Champion are all just as trivial as they were the first time. So now, all we have to do is optimize Gyarados in the same fashion, then go through one final race to see how much each of our contestants has improved. Except, there's a bit of a problem here, because the optimization testing for Alakazam took me about 2 hours to complete in real time while streaming on Twitch. But the optimization for Gyarados didn't take me 2 hours. In fact, it didn't take me 3 hours. It didn't take me 4, 5, or 6 hours. No, the optimization for Gyarados took me 9 hours to complete before I finally found a routing that I was satisfied with, because it turns out that Gyarados is a far less straightforward Pokemon to play than Alakazam, and the decision tree for exactly which trainers to battle, which moves to use, which items to pick up, and so on, is much larger for Gyarados than it is for Alakazam. And at first glance, you can probably see why. With Alakazam, its move pool is so narrow and yet so powerful that it really only ever has one plan of attack. That is, rely on Confusion until you get Psybeam, rely on Psybeam until you get Psychic, then rely on Psychic the rest of the way. And with only a small handful of exceptions, that's all Alakazam ever really needs to get by. But with Gyarados on the other hand, because its move pool is so much more varied, not only does that make it more difficult to determine which moves to teach at what time, that also makes managing our power points much trickier. For example, while routing out the early game, specifically Nugget Bridge and the SSN, I was extremely careful to note which Pokemon were not one-shot with Bubble Beam, so that we could instead one-shot them with Hydro Pump, which by the way only has 5 power points, so we have to be careful to use Hydro Pump only when absolutely necessary. Luckily though, only 2 Pokemon in Nugget Bridge required Hydro Pump, and only 2 Pokemon on the SSN required Hydro Pump, one of which is Rival 3's Pidgeotto, which is great news because it means that as long as Hydro Pump connects, Pidgeotto will go down in a single hit, allowing us to avoid its Sand Attack. But a more subtle, yet perhaps even more important point, is that Gyarados' slow level up rate, which made the mid-game so awkward in the first run, was extremely difficult to navigate during the optimization runs. So, in other words, the early game from the beginning all the way up through Rival 4 is quite painless, but unfortunately after completing the Lavender Tower mission, there are really no good options moving forward, because in the first run, we clearly weren't ready for Koga, and although the battle against Erica and Rival 5 were technically won on the first attempt, they still weren't won in a manner that I felt would be totally consistent. So to test this, we head over to Rival 5 first. And in the battle, we're so underleveled that Ice Beam doesn't one-shot Pidgeot, meaning that it can potentially drop our accuracy with Sand Attack, and Ice Beam doesn't one-shot Execute, meaning that it can potentially paralyze with Stun Spore, Thunderbolt doesn't one-shot the opposing Gyarados, Body Slam doesn't one-shot Alakazam, and Surf doesn't even one-shot Charizard. And even though here we win the battle on the first attempt, I test the battle again, and this time the opposing Gyarados and Alakazam chip our health down low enough that Charizard can knock us out with Slash. Not to mention that the Charizard also outspeeds, meaning that it will be guaranteed to get in at least one hit before we knock it out, assuming we do. So as soon as I realized that, I considered that in Silphco on the 10th floor, there is an optional trainer guarding both a rare candy and a Carbos, which is the vitamin that boosts speed. And although Alakazam and Gyarados both skipped this trainer in their first run to save time, I figured in this run for Gyarados, it might be worth it to fight this trainer in order to access the Carbos and outspeed the Charizard. But unfortunately, it turns out that Charizard still outspeeds even in spite of the Carbos. And even if it didn't, the Pidgeot's potential Sand Attack and the Execute's potential Stun Spore would still make this battle way too close for comfort. So because of all this, it seems that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to finding the most consistent battle following Rival 4. And I did eventually come up with a winning strategy, but first I need to explain one very important aspect of Gyarados' first run that I didn't mention at the time, which is that in Pokemon Red and Blue, Water-type Pokemon have a very distinct advantage that Gyarados was unfortunately not able to utilize. What I mean by that is that for most Pokemon, especially water types, it is extremely beneficial to surf to Cinnabar Island to face Blaine as soon as possible, partly because he's usually so easy to defeat, and partly because the Pokemon Mansion right next to the Cinnabar Gym has several very useful vitamins, but most importantly because of the boost to your Pokemon's special stat provided by Blaine's Volcano Badge, thus making the rest of the run much easier. The catch though, is that in order to use Surf, you must first acquire Lapras from Silphco, which is walled off behind Rival 5. Functionally meaning that for most solo Pokemon, the Rival 5 fight must precede the Blaine fight. But in the case of water Pokemon that can learn Surf without the need for Lapras, that frees up the Pokemon's routing in such a way that it can face Blaine prior to the rival. However, in the case of Gyarados there's a problem, which is that Koga's Soul Badge is required for using Surf outside of battle. And since Gyarados had such a problem defeating Koga in the first run, that meant that it had to wait to reap all the benefits of the Blaine fight until much later than we would have liked. However, in our optimization testing, I determined that there was actually a way to defeat Koga fairly consistently, thus freeing up Gyarados to surf to Cinnabar Island as soon as possible. And that is, we use all of the rare candies we've obtained so far to level up to a point that we can hopefully one-shot the Coughings with Surf and two-shot the Muck and the Weezing, as opposed to the first run where the Coughings were two-shot, the Muck was three-shot, and the Weezing would have been a four-shot if it didn't knock us out. So to kick off the battle at the higher level, we go for Surf and... Are you kidding me? Surf is still just shy of one-shotting the Coughing? Well, now it looks like we need yet another plan of attack, because although we do win this particular attempt at Koga, I really want to one-shot the Coughings to make the battle more consistent. But then, I had an idea. You see, earlier when we faced Rival 4, we used Ice Beam to replace Hydro Pump. But what if instead we use Ice Beam to replace Bubble Beam? Granted, it does feel somewhat out of place for Gyarados to get rid of its principal stab move, but realistically we don't actually need Bubble Beam to get through Rival 4 or the Lavender Tower mission, and we can instead just rely on Body Slam, thus bringing our Rival 4 moveset to Ice Beam, Body Slam, Hydro Pump, and Thunderbolt. That way, after Lavender Tower, we can acquire Surf from Safari Zone to replace Ice Beam, meaning that, as long as I'm correct in my prediction that Hydro Pump will allow us to consistently defeat Koga, I think I've finally come up with a moveset routing that will work for Gyarados. And indeed, upon consistency testing Koga with Hydro Pump, going in at level 36 thanks to a few rare candies, it turns out that Hydro Pump does one-shot the Coughings, allowing us to win the battle 9 out of 10 times, with the one loss being a result of a critical hit Self Destruct from the Weezing. So now, it fortunately turns out that solving that one set of problems was the key to unlocking the entire rest of the game, because now that we found the best way to defeat Koga, that gives Gyarados access to more levels, the speed boost from Koga's Soul Badge, a Carbos from the Pokemon Mansion, the TM for Blizzard from the Pokemon Mansion, and the special boost from Blaine's Volcano Badge, all of which make all the remaining boss battles of the run much easier to contend with. And now, as we head to face Erica with our new routing, Gyarados outspeeds and one-shots her entire team with Blizzard, after which we head to Silphco to face Rival 5, and his entire team is outsped in one-shot as well. However, after defeating the rival, we're still not quite finished in Silphco just yet. Because remember how in our first run, Lance and the champion's Gyarados were both just shy of a one-shot with Thunderbolt? Well, to play around that, while we're in Silphco, we also head to the 7th floor to pick up an extra calcium to boost our special stat so that we can one-shot the opposing Gyarados when the time comes. Then after completing the Silphco mission, we head over to the Saffron Gym to face Sabrina. And in the battle, this time we're high enough level that we can consistently win the battle by just spamming Body Slam. Then after defeating Sabrina, we quickly dispense with Giovanni, then face Rival 6. And here, finding the right strategy for this battle took some experimentation. For starters, the rival's opening Pidgeot is just shy of a one-shot with Blizzard, so that won't work. And because of that, my first inclination was to use some rare candies, but first I checked Gyarados' experience to see that it's only 579 experience points to the next level, meaning that if we want to maximize the experience provided by our rare candies, we'll have to fight one extra trainer to get Gyarados over that threshold. And fortunately, I know just the place to do it, because remember that trainer in Silphco that guarded the Carbos and the rare candy? Well, in this particular test run, we actually skipped him, because the only reason that I fought him in the previous test run was to get the Carbos to outspeed Rival 5's Charizard. But since we eventually found a routing that allowed us to fight Rival 5 at a higher level, it turns out we didn't actually need that Carbos. But now, since we have to fight an extra trainer anyway, it might as well be him. So, after defeating that trainer and grabbing the extra Carbos and the rare candy, we head back to Route 23, feed 3 rare candies up to level 48, and at this level, everything besides the Alakazam is outsped in one shot, and the Alakazam is a consistent 2-shot, meaning that we can now move on to the Elite Four. And although Lorelei and Bruno are no problem at all, now we come to Agatha. And apart from Koga, this battle is the one where our strategy changed the most between our first run and this one, because this time we've come prepared with Mimic to copy the opening Gengar's Hypnosis. Except there's a bit of a problem, and that is, there's not really an ideal move to replace with Mimic. Because we need Blizzard to take care of Lance's Dragons and the Champion's Exeggutor, we need Thunderbolt to take care of Lance's Gyarados and the Champion's Gyarados, we need Hyper Beam, which Gyarados is about to learn on its next level up, to deal with the Champion's Alakazam, and replacing Surf isn't an option. But after some intense deliberation, I did eventually come up with a plan, and that is replace Thunderbolt with Mimic, then upon leveling up to 52 in the middle of the Agatha fight, learn Hyper Beam to replace Body Slam in the hopes that Hyper Beam will be enough to take out the opposing Gyarados without using Thunderbolt. So, with our moveset consisting of Surf, Blizzard, Mimic, and Body Slam, soon to be replaced with Hyper Beam, we go into Agatha. And here, we do just as planned by mimicking Gengar's Hypnosis, putting Gengar to sleep, and spamming Surf until it goes down. Then that causes Gyarados to level up to 52, at which point we replace Body Slam with Hyper Beam. And against Golbat... Wait, what? What happened to Hypnosis? Okay, so I learned something new just now, which is that apparently in Gen 1, if your Pokemon levels up mid-battle and learns a new move while also knowing a move that it mimicked from another Pokemon, the mimicked move will just go back to being Mimic, meaning that we no longer have access to Hypnosis for the rest of the fight. Alright, so how in the world are we going to resolve this? Well, after some brainstorming, I came up with a potential solution. What if, upon Gyarados' level up to 52, we don't learn Hyper Beam at all, and instead just mimic Hyper Beam from Lance's Gyarados to knock out the opposing Gyarados and then use Blizzard for the Dragonairs? Well, we try that, and Hyper Beam doesn't come close to knocking out the Gyarados, so that's not going to work. Okay, what if instead of replacing Thunderbolt with Mimic, we replace Blizzard? That way, we can mimic the opposing Gyarados' Hyper Beam, then knock out Gyarados with Thunderbolt, and knock out the Dragonairs with Hyper Beam. Well, we try that, and Hyper Beam again comes just shy of knocking out the Dragonair, so that's not going to work. Well, eventually I came up with the winning strategy, but it involved a little bit of math. Because what I had to do was look at a spreadsheet that lists the experience yield of every trainer battle in the entire game, and cross-reference that with a chart that details how much experience Gyarados needs to grow from one level to the next, so that we can find the exact number of rare candies to use before and during the Elite Four to level up to 52 immediately at the end of the Agatha fight upon knocking out her last Pokemon. That way, we'll be able to go into Agatha with Surf, Blizzard, Thunderbolt, and Mimic, then level up to replace Mimic with Hyper Beam, so that we go into the Lance fight with Surf, Blizzard, Thunderbolt, and Hyper Beam. And fortunately, this plan works beautifully because Hypnosis makes Agatha much more consistent than she was before, after which we have super effective type coverage for the remainder of the league, with the exception of Alakazam, at which point we use Hyper Beam. However, even after all that, there's still one more tiny problem that needs to be solved, because in the final battle, the champion's ace Charizard is so fast that it can easily outspeed and knock out Gyarados with Slash, making the battle much less consistent than I would like. However, in that very moment I thought, all this time I've just been assuming that forcing the rival to choose Charmander as his starter Pokemon was clearly the right choice thanks to Gyarados' type advantage. But what if that assumption is based on a fallacy? Because, as I've discussed many times on this channel, the correct starter for the rival is often less about the starter in its own right, but rather how the starter affects the champion's fully fleshed out team at the end of the game. In other words, the champion will always lead his battle with Pidgeot, followed by Alakazam, followed by Rhydon. But then the next 3 Pokemon will always be Exeggutor, Arcanine, and Gyarados, with the exception that one of those last 3 Pokemon is replaced with the starter of the appropriate type. That is, if at the beginning of the game the rival chose Bulbasaur, then the champion's Exeggutor will be replaced with Venusaur. If the rival chose Charmander, then the champion's Arcanine will be replaced with Charizard, and if the rival chose Squirtle, then the champion's Gyarados will be replaced with Blastoise. And in all of these runs that we've completed so far, we've had the rival choose Charmander. But in this next practice run, let's test how consistent the champion battle is if we have the rival choose Bulbasaur. After all, the champion's Venusaur is still weak to Gyarados' Blizzard, so it very well may work out for the better. Well, this run leading up to the champion goes just as smoothly as the previous one did, no surprises there. So now, let's see how our battle against the champion goes, this time with Venusaur as his ace. To start, we outspeed and one-shot Pidgeot with a critical hit Blizzard, after which the fight against Alakazam goes as well as it possibly could, because it opens with a full health recover and we knock it out with Hyper Beam. Then Rhydon falls to Surf as usual, however, the champion's Gyarados promptly brings our good luck streak to a screeching halt, because even in spite of the calcium that we picked up from Sylph, it just barely survives Thunderbolt and knocks us out with a critical hit Hyper Beam. So forget about Venusaur, even the champion's Gyarados is too much of a threat for this strategy to be viable. But fortunately, there is still one more starter Pokemon that we haven't tried that would prevent the champion from wielding either a Charizard or a Gyarados. So, let's restart the run yet again, and this time we'll make the rival choose Squirtle as his starter, thus leaving the champion's team with Pidgeot, Alakazam, Rhydon, Arcanine, Exeggutor, and Blastoise. So this time as we make our way toward the champion, I'm really hoping that this last-ditch effort will work out for us. Because if facing the champion's Blastoise team turns out to be just as unviable as facing his Charizard team or his Venusaur team, we'll be out of options. And from there, we'll have no choice but to either train up to a higher level before heading into the Elite Four, or just bite the bullet and accept that the last leg of Gyarados' run will be wildly inconsistent. And unfortunately, in both of those scenarios, Gyarados pretty much concedes the race to Alakazam before it even starts. So now, let's kick off this champion battle and see just how much of a shot Gyarados really has. Well, this time, Blizzard doesn't get the critical hit on Pidgeot, allowing it to retaliate with a wing attack to deal about a quarter before going down. Next, Alakazam gets off a Psybeam to deal another quarter, after which Hyper Beam connects to knock out the Alakazam. Then Rhydon leaves just as soon as it arrived, and now for the first time in any of Gyarados' test runs so far, we face against Arcanine, who just barely survives a Surf, then luckily gets off a clutch Leer to drop our defense, but also badge boost our special, and one more Surf takes it out. But then out comes Exeggutor, and to be fair, Exeggutor is a little more threatening than Venusaur would have been in its place, because its massive special makes Blizzard a 3-shot, where Venusaur would have been a 2-shot. But thanks to the badge boost from Leer, Blizzard instead does about half, and Exeggutor retaliates with a Stomp to bring us to about a quarter before fainting to another Blizzard. And now, we get to see how our ultimate strategy pans out, because out comes the champion's ace Blastoise. And in this case, although you might think that Gyarados doesn't currently have enough HP to survive Blastoise's attacks, the champion's AI will cause Blastoise to always use Bite, because its other 3 moves, Withdraw, Hydro Pump, and Blizzard, are either Water or Ice-type moves that the AI will never use against an opposing Water-type Pokemon. So because of that, after Blastoise tanks Gyarados' Thunderbolt in the yellow, it goes for Bite to bring Gyarados to just 10 hit points, but then one more Thunderbolt is enough to get the job done and defeat the champion. Well, that was certainly a long and winding road to reach our destination, but now I think we finally found a routing for Gyarados that will put up a competitive result against Alakazam, meaning that after all this time, we can finally begin Alakazam and Gyarados' ultimate runs that will determine the winner. Personally, I'm really excited to see not only which of these behemoths will emerge victorious, but also to see if either of these Pokemon can achieve our coveted sub-40 time. So, no use talking about it any further, let's dive right into these runs, starting with Alakazam. The beginning of the playthrough is exactly the same as it was before, with one major exception. You see, because I knew that this was going to be such an incredibly tight race between Alakazam and Gyarados, I hacked the game to have us begin with a Sandshrew and a Spearow in our party, so that neither Alakazam nor Gyarados would have to waste time catching the HM Mules. And I also made it to where the trash can puzzle in the Vermilion Gym is automatically solved. That way, when one Pokemon wins over the other, no one can complain that it was just a matter of bad luck. And I also considered hacking the game to turn off wild encounters to eliminate that component of RNG as well, but I decided against it because knocking out the wild Pokemon in Route 1, Viridian Forest, and Mount Moon is actually an essential part of the experience routing. Plus, the fact that Gyarados has fewer power points than Alakazam means that Gyarados is more greatly punished by the Mount Moon encounters than Alakazam is. And finally, Gyarados' slow level up rate makes it so that Gyarados will likely see a handful of wild encounters in the Pokemon Mansion in spite of using Repel, whereas Alakazam will not thanks to being at a higher level. Therefore, if I were to turn off wild encounters, that would put Gyarados at an unfair advantage. So, with all that explanation out of the way, all we have to do is sit back and watch Alakazam and Gyarados steamroll their way through the beginning of the game, obliterating each Pokemon that they come across like it's nothing. And at least in this earliest portion of the game, the vast majority of the time that we saved during this run compared to our very first run is simply a matter of me executing the commands more rapidly thanks to muscle memory, without the need to stop and think for a split moment about every little decision, allowing Alakazam to defeat Lieutenant Surge at an astounding 12 minutes and 4 seconds. And now you might be thinking that Gyarados would have a much later Surge split than Alakazam, because in the first run, Gyarados skipped the Vermilion Gym because of its type disadvantage, and then backtracked to defeat Lieutenant Surge later. But in this run, I knew that Alakazam would put up such a competitive result that Gyarados simply cannot afford to play it safe. If Gyarados wants to defeat Alakazam, we have no choice but to make the risky play and face Lieutenant Surge immediately. So to begin the fight, Gyarados outspeeds and one-shots Voltorb, then outspeeds and one-shots Pikachu, and then Raichu outspeeds and one-shots Gyarados with Thunderbolt. Well, we all knew that was a possibility, but hey, Gyarados lost that fight at 11 minutes and 48 seconds, which means that Gyarados' Surge split would have been over 30 seconds faster than Alakazam's if only it had won the fight. But even so, in this race we all know that Gyarados is fighting an uphill battle against Alakazam, and we all know that Gyarados stands no chance against Alakazam if Gyarados completes the run with multiple resets. So, instead of continuing the run, we start over entirely. And as usual, the beginning of the game goes just as planned, and Gyarados steamrolls its way to Lieutenant Surge as expected. So, we begin the fight. Voltorb goes down, Pikachu goes down, Raichu outspeeds with Thundershock to deal half, Gyarados brings Raichu to a sliver with a critical hit body slam, and Raichu finishes Gyarados with another Thundershock. So, we restart the run again. In attempt number 3, Voltorb goes down, Pikachu goes down, and Raichu knocks out Gyarados with Thunderbolt. So, we restart yet again. And finally, in attempt number 4, Voltorb goes down, Pikachu goes down, and out comes Raichu. But instead of attacking, Surge uses an X-Speed, allowing a critical hit body slam to knock out the Raichu and leave Gyarados with a record Surge split of 11 minutes and 44 seconds, a full 20 seconds ahead of Alakazam. And now that Gyarados has finally gotten past its greatest hurdle, the race is on, and both of our competitors are at full sprint to the finish line. Gyarados makes it to Celadon City at 15:06, and Alakazam arrives just 4 seconds behind at 15:10. However, unfortunately for Gyarados, it's here that Alakazam's raw power begins to outpace Gyarados' versatility, because while both our competitors are able to outspeed and one-shot very nearly every Pokemon that comes their way with ease, Gyarados has to detour ever so slightly to pick up just a handful of vitamins, one extra rare candy, and fight one extra trainer in Silphco to get over the experience threshold at Rival 6 that we discussed earlier, whereas Alakazam can sweep the game without going through all that extra prep work, ultimately meaning that when Alakazam defeats Rival 6, at 29 minutes and 50 seconds, that puts Alakazam a full minute and 41 seconds ahead of Gyarados' Rival 6 split of 31 minutes and 31 seconds. So for now, it certainly appears that Alakazam is in a very favorable position to win the race, as both Pokemon make their way through Victory Road. It's certainly been a wild ride pushing both Alakazam and Gyarados to the absolute limits of their performance. So, let's head into the Indigo Plateau and reap the fruits of all our hard work, starting with Alakazam against Lorelei. Lorelei leads with Dewgong. Alakazam uses Psychic to bring Dewgong to yellow, and Dewgong opens with a massive critical hit takedown to deal over half damage. Another Psychic takes out Dewgong, and then we go into Cloyster. Psychic brings Cloyster to red, Cloyster lands a Supersonic to confuse Alakazam, and Alakazam hits itself in confusion. But thankfully Lorelei then uses a Super Potion instead of attacking, and Cloyster goes down. Out comes Slowbro. We begin by attempting Recover, but again Alakazam hits itself in confusion, this time down to red health. This is not looking good. Slowbro growls, and Alakazam spites the confusion and successfully recovers this time, not once but twice back up to full health. Then Slowbro uses Withdraw, Psychic brings Slowbro to half, and finally Slowbro does a blip with Water Gun and goes down in the next turn. Then, because of the growl, against Jinx we're forced into using Toxic instead of Dig, after which Jinx uses Thrash. But then we go for Dig, and it lands a clutch critical hit for the knockout. And finally against Lapras, we play it safe with another Recover, after which Lapras deals about a quarter with Hydro Pump, and Psychic brings Lapras to half health. But then the worst happens, and Lapras retaliates with a Body Slam that paralyzes, allowing it to outspeed on the next turn with another Body Slam to bring Alakazam down to red. Alright, this is it. Alakazam is 25% to be trapped in paralysis, causing us to lose on the next turn, and 75% to break through the paralysis and win the battle. Moment of truth. Alakazam breaks through and lands a Psychic for the knockout, meaning that as much of a nail-biter as that Lorelei fight was just now, we can move on to Bruno and sweep his team, and move on to Agatha and sweep her team, leaving Alakazam walking into Lance's chamber at 34 minutes and 20 seconds. But before we witness Alakazam's battle against Lance, let's see how Gyarados fares against Lorelei. Again, Lorelei leads with Dewgong, and a couple Thunderbolts take it out, with Dewgong just using a failed growl before going down. Thunderbolt then brings Cloyster to red, Cloyster deals about a 6 with Spike Cannon, the next Thunderbolt gets a Gen 1 miss, and Lorelei heals with a Super Potion, but it's not enough to save Cloyster from the next Thunderbolt, and Cloyster goes down. Then against Slowbro, in this particular run, thanks to the meticulous experience routing that I came up with before, I was able to teach Gyarados Mimic replacing Body Slam in preparation for the Lorelei fight, rather than waiting for Agatha specifically. So here we go for the time-tested strategy of mimicking Slowbro's Amnesia to buff up Gyarados' special, allowing us to one-shot Slowbro and Jinx. Lapras, however, is not one-shot thanks to a critical hit, but still, Lapras proceeds to do almost nothing with Body Slam before one more Thunderbolt takes it out. Then up next, Bruno is obviously a non-issue, but after Bruno comes Agatha, who is the second greatest sticking point in the run for Gyarados, behind only Lieutenant Surge. And although yes, mimicking Hypnosis does make this battle more consistent than it was before we adopted that strategy, it's still far from a guarantee. So, let's see if Gyarados can pull it off. To begin the fight, our initial setup works beautifully because Gengar outspeeds and misses a Hypnosis of its own, then we mimic Hypnosis, then Gengar uses Dream Eater, which has no effect while Gyarados is awake. Then we successfully put Gengar to sleep, take it out with 3 Surfs, and go into Golbat at full health. Golbat then goes down to Blizzard, after which we outspeed Haunter, put it to sleep, and knock it out by spamming Surf as well, meaning that we've made it to Arbok at full health and with 0 status conditions. So this is excellent news, because that means that a first attempt victory is within reach. So against Arbok, Hypnosis lands and Gyarados takes it out. However, the final Gengar disrupts our streak because it opens by landing a Confuse Ray and Gyarados hits itself in confusion. Then Gengar poisons Gyarados with Toxic, and on the next turn we power through the confusion and land Hypnosis. So now, our victory will depend entirely on whether we can inflict damage on Gengar fast enough to outpace the compounding poison damage of Toxic. Well, in the next turn, Gyarados lands a critical hit Surf to bring Gengar to yellow, but Gengar wakes up, and after we bring it to red with another Surf, it lands another Confuse Ray. But then Gyarados spites the confusion one more time, lands another Surf, and we've done it. We've defeated Agatha on the first attempt, allowing Gyarados to level up, forget Mimic and learn Hyper Beam, and walk into Lance's chamber at 36 minutes and 25 seconds. But thanks to how long the Agatha battle took for Gyarados, in comparison to Alakazam, that only served to widen Alakazam's lead all the way to 2 minutes and 5 seconds. So, unfortunately for Gyarados, unless Alakazam trips at the finish line, which I really don't anticipate, it does seem that Gyarados' chance of winning today's race are slim to none. However, Gyarados does still have plenty of time to meet our goal of finishing the run in less than 40 minutes. So, let's head into the Lance battle and see if Gyarados can pull it off. To start, Lance leads with a Gyarados of his own who was one-shot with Thunderbolt thanks to the Calcium that we picked up in Sylph, after which Blizzard takes out both Dragonairs, Aerodactyl outspeeds with Takedown and feints to a single Surf, and Dragonite goes down to Blizzard as well for a quick and painless victory, which is exactly the kind of result that Gyarados needs to achieve the sub-40 time. Then against the champion, we go for Blizzard on Pidgeot, which gets a critical hit for the knockout. Then unfortunately, Alakazam goes for the worst of all possible moves in the form of Reflect, meaning that Gyarados' Hyper Beam doesn't get the one-shot and allows Alakazam to deal about a quarter with Psybeam, after which Gyarados has to recharge, and Alakazam uses Psychic to bring Gyarados to yellow before going down to another Hyper Beam. Then obviously Rhydon is one-shot with Surf, as is Arcanine thanks to a critical hit. Then out comes Exeggutor. It takes about half from Blizzard, brings Gyarados to red with Stomp, and goes down to one more Blizzard. And now finally we have Blastoise, who, as I mentioned before, has AI that will force it to always use Bite. We go for Thunderbolt, which brings Blastoise to yellow and also paralyzes. Then Blastoise breaks through the paralysis, uses Bite to bring Gyarados to just 6 HP, and one more Thunderbolt takes out the Blastoise, making us champion of the Pokemon League. However, Alakazam still has 2 more battles to get through, so let's see how Alakazam handles the remainder of the league. To begin against Lance, Alakazam braces itself with Reflect in preparation for Hyper Beam, and Gyarados deals about a quarter with Hydro Pump. Then we use Psychic to deal half to Gyarados, after which Gyarados retaliates with Hyper Beam to bring Alakazam to yellow and goes down in the next turn. Then we use the much weaker Dragonair as an opportunity to heal, with not 1 but 2 recovers back up to full health. Then a Slam from Dragonair does almost nothing thanks to Reflect. Then Dragonair is one-shot with Psychic, and the second Dragonair is almost one-shot, but luckily Lance just uses a Hyper Potion, and Psychic gets the more favorable range to one-shot in the next turn. Now out comes Aerodactyl, who is one-shot with Psychic, and finally Dragonite goes to red thanks to a critical hit, retaliates with Slam, and goes down in the next turn, leaving Alakazam with a full 3-minute window for winning the race against Gyarados, and almost a 5-minute window for achieving the sub-40 runtime. And now, only one final battle stands in Alakazam's way. Let's see it in action. As usual, Alakazam leads with Psychic to bring Pidgeot to yellow health, after which Pidgeot uses Mirror Move on Psychic to deal all of 6 damage. But in this case, the damage is not the scary part, because that Psychic also lowered Alakazam's special. And although Pidgeot does go down in the next turn with no issue, that special drop was really going to cost us, because it means that we may not have enough Psychic power points to knock out the rest of the team. However, we do still have an out to victory, because we have access to Toxic, which we immediately use against the opposing Alakazam, after which it goes for the best of all possible moves in the form of Reflect. Then we use a Reflect of our own to prepare for the rest of the team, and the opposing Alakazam recovers. Then in the next several turns, just to save as many Psychic power points as possible, we just spam Recover and patiently wait for the poison damage to accumulate and knock out the Alakazam. And now moving on to Rhydon, ordinarily its special stat would be so paper thin that we could knock it out with a single Psychic, but as far as ahead in the race as Alakazam is right now, I wanted to play around all of our possible lose conditions, up to and including running out of Psychic power points. So instead of using Psychic, we again open with Toxic and spam Recover until Rhydon goes down. Against Gyarados, however, I decide I've had enough messing around, and we take out Gyarados with 2 Psychics, during which Gyarados uses Hydro Pump, leaving Alakazam with half health and 6 Psychic power points going into Arcanine, which, unless something goes horribly wrong, should be plenty to win the battle, even in spite of Alakazam's weakened special. So now, just to play it as safe as possible, we heal back to full with Recover, and Arcanine goes for Ember. Then Psychic deals half, Arcanine uses Takedown, and faints to another Psychic. Then out comes the final Pokemon of the entire run, Venusaur, and thanks to its type weakness, it goes down to red from Psychic, takes in Sunlight in preparation for Solar Beam, but never gets a chance to launch the attack because one more Psychic knocks out the Venusaur, making us champion of the Pokemon League. Results. In round 2, Alakazam completed the game in 37 minutes and 28 seconds, and Gyarados completed the game in 38 minutes and 14 seconds, meaning that after optimization, Alakazam again wins the race, this time beating Gyarados by a total of 46 seconds. Conclusion. Alakazam and Gyarados are without a doubt among the strongest Pokemon in the entire game, with Alakazam capable of riding its enormous speed and special to victory in most every battle, and with Gyarados capable of utilizing its incredible offensive diversity to adapt to most any situation. In Alakazam's case, the only aspect of the game that ever held it back even slightly was amusingly the other Alakazams, possessed by Rival 5, Sabrina, Rival 6, and the Champion. And in Gyarados' case, it was held back slightly by its slow experience group, weakness to Thunderbolt from Lieutenant Surge's Raichu, and lack of an efficient way to knock out the powerful Poison-type Pokemon possessed by Koga and Agatha. Additionally, Alakazam was clearly the more intuitive Pokemon to play, with Gyarados utilizing a sub-optimal navigation across the Kanto map during its first run, and finding far greater room to improve than Alakazam during its test runs, thus allowing Alakazam to win by over 2 minutes in the first race, compared to winning by less than 1 minute in the second race. And speaking of, as I finished playing these runs and began writing this script, I couldn't help but just stand in awe at just how neck and neck the race between Alakazam and Gyarados really was, despite both Pokemon being extremely powerful, but in completely different ways. So, congratulations to Alakazam for a very well-deserved victory, and congratulations to Gyarados for being such a formidable opponent. But now, let's discuss tier ranking, because obviously both Alakazam and Gyarados fall into the S tier, that's not a question. But how exactly do they compare to our other S tier Pokemon? Well, keeping in mind that our tier list considers each Pokemon's first attempt only, Gyarados actually places above Nidoking, but below Nidoqueen, even despite that Gyarados' optimized run was much faster than Nidoqueen's optimized run. Alakazam, however, places even above Nidoqueen and steals her spot at the top of the leaderboard, thus making Alakazam so far the best Pokemon that I've ever played for solo challenges in Gen 1. Additionally, after having played with so many fantastic Pokemon lately, Poliwrath, who currently sits at the bottom of the S tier, seems just a little bit lackluster by comparison, so Poliwrath will now navigate from the S tier down to the A tier, which actually works out very cleanly because Poliwrath's runtime was just a few seconds over 1 hour, meaning that the 1 hour mark will, at least for now, serve as a nice round threshold between the A tier and the S tier. As you may have noticed, this video once again breaks the record for my longest video to date. So if you've made it all the way to the end, I know you love Pokemon as much as I do, and I thank you so much for joining me on this awesome adventure. The next video will be a viewer request, so if you have an idea for which Pokemon I should play next, let me know in the comments. And on the way out, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and consider pledging on Patreon. See you next time, everyone. Take care. Yeah, like, I don't anticipate Mewtwo being a problem here. Because we can just set up Toxic like we did before with the Alakazam. Well, unless it misses. Okay, there we go. And see, now we got Reflect up for Swift, and we can just... I'm just gonna spam Recover the whole way. No reason not to. And there we go. We got it. Alright. I taught Double Edge specifically for this fight. Recover? Nope. Come on. The recoil's gonna stack up on me here. Okay. Alright. Maybe this time... I mean, Blizzard does have a 10% chance to freeze. If I just try Blizzard over and over again, yeah, there it is. I get the freeze, and I can knock it out for free. Well, okay. I guess that's the way to do it.